Did you guys know that the Apple iStore now has a Game Boy Advance emulator? It's called iGBA, and I really hope this video doesn't age poorly before it's even out. Yeah, that's literally the whole reason I'm making a video about the Sonic Advance trilogy, because I installed iGBA not knowing the whole plagiarism debacle, and I played some Sonic Advance. So the Sonic Advance games are a really interesting part of the Sonic series. Released in the early 2000s, they're a historical curiosity in a way, given they're 2D platformers in the same vein of the classic Sonic games. At the same time, Sonic was going 3D. In fact, they were one of the first Sonic experiences made specifically for a non-Sega console. The games themselves aren't quite as memorable as the Genesis classics in my opinion, but they're still great follow-ups to their legacy, and they deserve to be remembered. Let me tell you this, there are some really interesting zones overall, arguably more than you'd expect in a game like this. Zones that I'd like to talk about today. After making videos ranking the zones of Sonic Mania and Sonic 3 on Knuckles, I've been searching far and wide, traveling the wastelands with nothing but my fists and a bag on a stick, looking for my next series of Sonic zones to rank. By the way, I've been playing a lot of Fist the North Star Lost Paradise lately. I'm not mentioning that for any reason. So, once I suddenly got the ability to play Game Boy Advance games on the toilet, well, I could already do that on Switch, I mean with my phone. Once I suddenly got the ability to play GBA games on my phone, on the toilet, I thought, hey, why not take a look at this corner of the Sonic series, which I don't have much experience with. Why not follow up those videos and rank each zone from Sonic Advance 1, 2, and 3 based on how enjoyable they are, specifically how fun they are in general, what they teach a player, and even their atmosphere. Just know that final zones, aka zones where it's basically just a boss battle against Eggman or whatever stupid robots, don't count for this ranking. Before we start, if you're interested, please check out some of my other Sonic Zone rankings and maybe even subscribe or watch some other stuff. Thank you. There's a ton of these to get through this time, so let's just stop wasting time. Here's the worst, most stinky, doo-doo Sonic Zone to ever hit the Game Boy Advance. Yeah, this isn't even technically a zone by the way, it's just Sky Canyon. They're only called zones in Sonic Advance 1, not 2 or 3. Sky Canyon is not that bad, because it's not a constant stream of BS, but there's just some really miserable stuff in here. For one, the zone starts with a section where you have to use a trick in midair, which is an ability that's never explained to you, and is difficult to even realize it's what you need to do, because you have to be at your jumps' apex for it to actually work. There's all sorts of these frustrating moments in here, and some absolutely unforgiving platforming sections in the worst way possible. This zone is infamous for a reason, and it should absolutely join the ranks of Labyrinth Zone or Marble Garden, as being a Sonic zone that makes you feel like you're banging your head against a wall. Ranking these zones for this video killed me. It was way harder than Sonic 3 or Mania. Why? Cause most of the zones are fine. There's not really any that sinks as low as some of Sonic's other stuff. This one is just really mediocre. The only real issue I had was the frequency of pits, and there's a reliance on rails which you grind on, which can be annoying when it's not communicated to you that you can only hop on them when they're flat. And why is that even a thing at all? And you'll frequently be flung towards those rails at a place you can't grind on them from, and will fall to your death too if you don't move. Apologies if I'm not saying too much on each zone in this video, by the way, but I can guarantee the worst zones is a lot more meh here than the worst of any other games, which is a good thing if anything. Holy shit, I have a lot to get through. This zone was also right after Sky Canyon, so maybe that soured me a little. Background visuals are also something I can see somebody finding grating, but I never had too severe a problem with them. I'm gonna consider these the same zone for the purpose of the ranking. You can look at both like one whole experience, where you start on the ground and move upwards, to transition to Eggman's base in space, where Act 1 is called Egg Rocket Zone, and Act 2 is called the Cosmic Angel. This is probably the last of the D tier levels, so there's a triumphant feeling carrying you throughout, and you get this sense of rising tension for your final battle, but several things are just lame. The physics feel patchwork at times, as several sections kill you in ways you genuinely can't tell what you did wrong, and there's one of my least favorite Sonic tropes in a few sections. The thing where you can fall and just repeat large sections over and over again. I'd rather just fall in a random pit and die. Oh, but don't worry, the zone covers that too. Also, why are we still using that upside down gimmick in Sonic? Please, it's not original anymore in the slightest. There are like 2 other zones later that do it too. Do you like slow platforming sections? If so, play Angel Island Zone in Sonic Advance 1. I'm not saying it's as bad as like Sonic 1 or anything, but in this zone, there's just an exorbitant amount of slow sections where you're platforming, and it's not enough to balance it out with speedier sections. I just find platforming sections in 2D Sonic primarily frustrating because of the physics, which are definitely made for going fast horizontally, and have too much platforming in a level can sour it for me. The platforming is mostly fair, however, which is more than I can say about lots of stuff in the Genesis games. Meh is all I can say here, I guess. Angel Island Zone is also the only zone from the Genesis trilogy, which is technically a quadrilogy, to directly be in the Sonic Advance games, although they seemingly mixed up its name with Sky Sanctuary, I guess. Also, I'm gonna just assume that entire forest on Angel Island that was burned down back in Sonic 3 had no issue growing back, so yay for nature. Sonic Advance has broken my heart. An ice zone that's just okay. I mean, the ice zone was my favorite part of both Mania and Sonic 3 and Knuckles, and I love how this game gives it a city background too. There's just not that much that stands out gameplay-wise, unfortunately. There's ramps and swings, those are cool, but this zone comes in fairly late in the game, and it feels like the first or second zone. So honestly, its placement in the game is the thing which keeps Ice Paradise down, unfortunately. Well, we got 2 other ice zones anyways. Also, this would be number 1 if I was judging zones based on their name. Ice Paradise. Okay, actually, screw it. I think Chaos Angel would be number 1 in that situation. The zone also has a nice ancient temple theme, and for a final zone, they still include a lot of faster sections, and it's a lot of fun. Although, what can I say? The pace is broken out by some of the most obnoxious platforming sections of this trilogy. Hate that. I can excuse it more for a final zone though, and to be clear, I don't dislike slower platforming in Sonic as a concept, it's just don't put falling boulders in places with these stupid tops you need to run on to have them move. Don't. The final zone of Sonic Advance 2 is fairly fun. It's speedy, yet decently tricky, in a way that's not too unfair. Egg Utopia is set in space, and it has a sort of gimmick where the screen turns upside down again. So yeah, it's a bit of a rehash of Sonic 3's final zone, but it does still have its own feel to it. The music for the zone is also a sleeper hit for one of the best pieces of music composed for the GBA. It's very epic and hypes you up to finish this game. It has some of those annoyingly placed pits that take way too long to kill you for some reason though, and that's an issue that plagues a lot of Sonic Advance 2, unfortunately. I also wish there were some more checkpoints. Those are my 2 main issues. A slightly better, but not that good, ice zone. The main level is your average Sonic stuff, which is pretty fun and speedy, but maybe a bit too easy when it's so relatively far into the game. Here's the thing though, This is one of the few zones with water in the Sonic Advance series, and it slows it down a little bit too much. There's a way to do water and have it be seamless and not a massive pace breaker, but it's not really done like that here. It's not terrible though, it's not that bad, just ill-placed, and the zone is fun anyways. The final boss, however, is horrible unless you cheese it with a character who can swim, but I haven't really been talking about the final bosses that much. Toy Kingdom is a great idea for a zone. It looks pretty and nice and joyous, if maybe a tad bright and obnoxious. And there's a casino night-esque chaotic amount of bumpers everywhere, and all the fun stuff that can entail from that. I also actually like that it was slightly slower, as it lets you have your fun with those things just a little bit more. What can I say? In case you couldn't tell, my standards for zones are wildly inconsistent based on the tiny things. There's also like the single biggest amount of instant crashes in the trilogy, which is great, and I felt like some of the tricks the zone uses were cool at first, but more out there welcome as you go along, which is also a flaw that makes me a bit more mixed on this zone. It's not that low though, because there's much to love, and who can really stay mad at a zone about toys? Working on a new idea for a joke. It's about like how Sonic likes having Green Hill Zone starts their games. I'm kind of trying to workshop it here. Does anyone have any ideas for funny jokes I can make about how Sonic likes starting their zones with Green Hill Zone? It's a thing Sonic likes to do a lot. Neo Green Hill Zone starts with a tropical area with sand, which I think is a great idea. This zone sort of mixes Palm Tree Panic with Green Hill and Emerald Hill zones, although that's kind of forgotten later on in Act 1, so it's just Green Hill Zone again. Neo Green Hill Zone. Continuing off that tropical theme though, there's a nice chill atmosphere, especially with the zone's music, and it's a slower first zone with less stakes. Green Hill Zone? Very easy. Neo Green Hill Zone is easier. The lack of much difficulty, and the fact that this zone is over pretty quickly, makes me kinda put it a little bit more down, but it's also the first zone, so I can't fault it too much. Also, I love the name Neo Green Hill Zone. It's a bit of a mouthful, and when I hear that I think it would be like an artificial zone constructed by Eggman or something. Maybe he imported the sand from California. I should technically hate Ocean Base more than I do. 8 to me instant crushes, simple as. It's got a lot of tropes I don't like that much. But man, Ocean Base kinda makes it work. It has genuinely clever solutions to some of its problems. Act 2 stands out well. You walk forward and the level's like, fuck you, go back to where you can. And you have to figure out that you can ascend a waterfall to get to where you really need to go. There's some other moments too where it's frustrating, sure, but it feels more like it has you thinking outside the box, rather than forcefully ejecting you from the box and then immediately slamming you into another one. I don't exactly know the full extent of what that metaphor means. So Ocean Base, you're a fine zone, but on thin fucking ice. Every zone in Sonic Advance 3 is a little unique, in that they have a hub world before gameplay, with a tiny bit of obstacles, but nothing that actually kills you. When I replayed every zone, to get footage and make sure my thoughts on each were accurate, and played Twinkle Snow, I looked away for a second, and I didn't even realize I had jumped into a level, and not the hub world. I played it for like 10 seconds before realizing. I feel like that should tell you something about this zone. We're firmly in average territory, because I had a lot of fun here, but kind of feel ambivalent to this zone as a symptom of Sonic Advance's zones blending together a little bit. I love Cybertrack's music. It's so good, and the flashing neon lights against a white background are gonna hurt a lot of people's eyes, so don't look too hard, I guess. What I really like about Cybertrack is that there are a lot of different routes that can surprisingly affect the gameplay in a way that feels deeper to me than the average Sonic zone. It's one of my favorite things about the Sonic levels, and this is one of the zones in the trilogy where I feel like it's done the best. Once again, there's a ton of room to run quickly, and for a later level there's still a ton of freedom to be had despite that difficulty. Okay, so... no, that's not a leaf forest. What the hell are you talking about? Dude, you just made Green Hill Zone again and tried to claim it's another thing. Anyways, it's the typical starting zone, and it's a great execution of the concept. The acts of the zone are absolutely packed with all sorts of level elements you can expect to see in the future, and it makes good use of elements like swings or springy things on the walls that are new and become prevalent later on in the game. As every first zone should do, it introduces you perfectly to the stuff you can expect to see later in the game. Simple, but fun. Good old Casino Zone. There's a bit less complete chaos than its inspiration of Casino Night Zone from Sonic 2. You're not going to be fun everywhere at literally all times, but there's all sorts of bumpers which can help you gain speed and momentum in a different sort of way. It's pretty damn great to basically bounce all around a stage. I'll talk more about why I like this format in a bit, because Sonic Advance 2 has a zone that's similar in gameplay to it, and I find it does just a tad better, and it's a bit more challenging as well. The second zone of Sonic Advance 1 might look like it should be the last zone, but it actually still works quite well. The first act ramps up a little from Neo Green Hill's easiness, and it feels like it's over in a second, but the second act introduces some slower sections and obstacles, which are just difficult enough to give you a good picture of Sonic's more difficult segments, while still being really, really fun. There's a great flow in the zone, and I consider it the best in the first Sonic Advance. Music Plant fills that niche of stuff like Casino Night Zone, where there's all sorts of bumpers, and the zone essentially turns into pinball. This time with a musical theme, where you bounce off pianos and cymbals and all sorts of musical instruments. So yeah, that's a really cool idea. Music-themed levels or areas are rare, but still a ton of fun. They could have gone a bit further with it, having more types of instruments, or a more seamless integration of the music in gameplay, but that's just a minor gripe of mine. The chaotic gameplay style of this zone matches the strength of Sonic's speedy gameplay well. I mentioned this before, but 2D classic Sonic's design philosophy is well studied and well explained. Faster segments act as a sort of reward for platforming challenges. These zones recontextualize it for just a couple levels, as those slower sections where platforming is supposed to be more emphasized are blended to a much more seamless degree with the speedy sections. This goes for Casino Paradise as well, just slightly less good. Our third best zone is Route 99, the beginning zone of Sonic Advance 3. It's got everything you know and love from opening zones, introducing new level elements that'll be common later in the game, blah blah blah. I've already said what makes those zones great. It's all here. The rails you grind on especially feel well introduced here. They kind of felt frustrating in Sonic Advance 2, and that might honestly just be because they weren't introduced too early on. This might sound weird, but what I like about it most is that it's actually pretty long. Each act's playthrough timed out to just under 3 minutes each, and they still feel fresh and well paced the whole way through. Some acts in the early game before Sonic Advance 3 felt like they were over too quick, and I appreciated that not being true here. Advance 3 is also where they had 3 full acts, and then a separate boss one, so the whole game is pretty rich in content. I also like that it's set in a city area. You know, you kind of bridge the gap between Sonic Adventure and the 2D games coming out then. You might not expect it from a volcano, but Hot Crater is the archetypical, really fast Sonic zone. It's an absolute power trip. It's literally inside of a volcano that you kinda almost just breeze by. Kinda showcasing that Pretendo does in fact do some stuff that the Genesis does, except run Sonic 1 well. There are of course a few areas where you need to get a platforming section, or need to figure out where to go next, but they're not as common as in most zones. That could be a problem, but it's still the second zone of the game, and yeah, they showcase what stupid things Sonic likes doing. I'll eat that shit up, and it's at least paced pretty well here. Best zone of Sonic Advance 2, and second best overall. Alright, here we go. Sunset Hill from Sonic Advance 3, the best zone in Sonic Advance. First off, I think Green Hill Zone as the second zone is a way better idea than you'd expect, and the remix of the theme with the GBA sound font sounds perfect. I just love how the blaring theme mixes with the slightly crappy GBA sound font without its sound chip. It made me curious to look up what the OST for Sonic 1 on GBA is like. It's fine. It sounds perfectly fine. I don't know what I thought it would sound like, or why even mention it. Sunset Hill takes everything you like about the first Green Hill Zone and ramps it up, including all sorts of stuff like rails to grind on, which are rendered here in a way that's equally as impressive as the loop-de-loops were in the original game, or even stuff like air-powered springs that you have to time your jumps with just a little. There's a great tragedy with this zone though, and that is that the good stuff here, it's just everything I've said but more. The zone's aesthetic is unique, and I don't think it plays like anything previously, but most of what makes the zone great is just that it's a more perfect version of some of the previous zones and Green Hill Zone, and their design philosophies, meaning it's a bit difficult to talk about as the best zone in the game. You know what? That actually doesn't sound that tragic. I think it's part of what makes this cool. The real tragedy is that I got instantly crushed once. This game fucking sucks. This zone ruined it. So there we go. Every Sonic Advance zone ranked. Admittedly, the Sonic Advance Trilogy zones are very consistent, for better or for worse. So some of their pros and cons had to be exaggerated a bit, because they blend together a lot. I enjoyed a lot of the zones here though, and I think the Sonic Advance Trilogy's obscurity and lack of acknowledgement is a real shame. None of these zones have come back afterwards, and when's the last time you saw Sonic Advance acknowledged anywhere? I guess there's Cream the Rabbit, but most people think she debuted in Sonic Heroes anyways. Here's hoping these games come back on Switch or something, cause even though I found some of the game bland, it deserves to be remembered, flaws and all, especially considering what it added to the Sonic franchise. And I mean, you get to visit Green Hill Zone at sunset, a tropical version, an icy city, a music and toy theme zone, and a whole bunch of other zones themes you know and love in a whole new light. Sonic Advance is neat, okay? It's cool, and I had a lot of fun going over why I think so here. Holy shit. That goddamn plane actually contributes something other than frustration in a 2D Sonic game. It finally happened. Not even Sonic Mania accomplished it. Knuckles has now forgiven Tails for building it. Until we get to Sonic 2. Speaking of which, my travels continue. I will journey across the land searching far and wide, not to understand the power that's inside or something about a lame rat guy, but instead to find the next Sonic game for me to complain about. I don't know which one I'll cover next, but eventually I'll talk more Sonic later. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you later.